So I had a cool idea, I think, for a series which I'll be doing for each type. And the basic idea is for each MBTI type, how likely are they to be religiously radicalized um, or sort of disconnected? So, say you have a type in some highly conservative religious society, maybe some Islamic state, and the individual in question was raised, let's say, in an echo chamber, very traditional, went to worship sessions, whatever they're called, regularly. They end up believing it genuinely themselves. So these are sort of the initial conditions. So this is a person who is very devout and takes the faith seriously, takes it to heart in the beginning. And then the question is, over time, will they continue to buy into it, or will they begin to question and alter their beliefs? And then sort of what might inspire these changes, and what's the likelihood that these changes will stick, or certain lines of questioning will be pursued, and so on, so on. So basically the idea is, will they be radicalized and remain that way, and maybe snowball into increasing radicalism, or will they sort of introspect, reflect, take a critical view on their own beliefs, and then maybe stray away from them? And so with all that being said, actually I'll add one more thing. And this isn't to say that religion or faith is bad or wrong or anything, or that people who believe it or continue to believe it are dumb or anything like that. Not at all. I do not believe that at all. In fact, it's complete toss-up. I think people of faith are incredibly intelligent. There's a lot of value in it and all that. Basically, I would say a person's intelligence and worth as a person isn't really dependent on what they believe, because I think we've all experienced religious people, who are just intolerable, and we've experienced religious people who are beautiful and wonderful. And conversely, we've probably seen atheists who are very selfless and generous, compassionate, and also those who are total losers and pricks, sticks in the mud, insert expression here. So with that absurdly long intro out of the way, it's just going to be this once because I think I'll start the series with this video. Let's hop into INFJ, and this will be mostly off the dome. I've been kind of thinking about it the past few days, but in my opinion, the INFJ, being raised in those initial conditions mentioned, sort of religious society, religious family, and then personal faith. So if you have an INFJ raised in these conditions, I believe that over time, especially if there isn't an influx or a flow of radically different opinions and knowledge and information, which in a conservative state might be the case. So the INFJ will, under these conditions, I believe, will end up becoming more radicalized and will buy more and more into the beliefs. And let me explain why. And this has to do with the INFJ function stack. And so you've got the 8. You've got hero, parent, child, inferior, nemesis, critic, trickster, and demonic. And I'll basically go over a few of those functions and how I believe they play into this trajectory of the INFJ. And the first one we can start with is Introverted Intuition hero. So the way this can be understood is Introverted Intuition is an inward-oriented perceiving function. And what happens is, over time, the intuitive introverted dominant will observe life, they will observe things, they'll listen to people, they'll hear new ideas, and as they absorb these ideas, there will subconsciously a template will be synthesized, which represents the sort of underlying essence or form or concept of all this information that they've been processing, picking up through their inferior SE. So they're taking in all this information, all these patterns, symbols, across the whole spectrum, strange to beautiful to depraved, whatever. They all take it in and they form concepts and structures which seem to represent some deep symbolic aspect of reality. And that's what introverted intuition is. So how does this play into the INFJ being sort of radicalized? Well, the thing is, if they're raised from the beginning, from childhood, and they're fed information, religious information, pertaining to truths of God and so on, and they see people's behaviors, they see the behaviors of the religious leaders, their parents, the religious texts. They sort of, as they absorb this information over time, they're going to form templates of how they believe reality to be, and it'll be a kind of comprehensive thing. And you see, the important bit here is that because the quality of and type of information is constrained, it's religious information, it's just one sphere of all information. So there will be a tendency to make sort of universal conclusions based off a limited data set. So this is the first reason I believe that an INFJ will tend to continue to believe very strongly in these religious ideas and beliefs that they have, because from the beginning they've been synthesizing these sort of representations of reality which they believe to be universal. And maybe by the time new information and opposing ideas and perspectives come in and they're exposed to them, it might be too late, because those templates and structures will be too deeply embedded in their psyche for them to want to change it. And other functions actually play into this as well. So may as well jump into one of the other, probably even the bigger function, which I think plays into the tendency for an INFJ to become radicalized. And I don't mean radicalized like they're going to blow themselves up. I just mean like genuine devout believer, takes it super seriously and lives it out in their life. That's what I mean. But anyway, this other function is TE blind spot. So a TE blind spot, this is the seventh function. It's honestly pretty annoying. I've pretty much every INFJ I've encountered, I love them, but they have this tendency to be extremely stubborn and not even dismissive, but just unlikely to take the things other people say, the rationale, their logic. They're unlikely to take that and actually integrate it into their thought process and model of reality. That's what TE blind spot is. They're sort of negligent of what the people around them are thinking. I've spent many, I don't even know what the timing it is, hours, talking to INFJs and explaining something in extreme detail, logic. I take their premises, I'm saying, hey, this is what you believe, and this is what follows, but then you end up here, and this sort of conflicts with what your initial premise is, like whatever, and they just sort of seem to ignore it. Or maybe they'll like look into the distance, sort of like acknowledge it and nod, but then they'll continue to believe in their initial intuitive impressions anyway. And this isn't really their fault. It's a blind spot, so you got to work with it. People have blind spots, but I do think it contributes to the INFJ tendency to persist in their beliefs. So they have introverted intuition forming these strong, deeply inwardly oriented and personal, because it's an introverted function. So we have these deep personal representations of reality that have been synthesized over time. And now there's a TE blind spot where incoming objections or logic or rationale which may oppose or conflict with those impressions and templates, it's sort of dismissed. Because what can you do? That's the hero function. It's heroic in intuitive dominance and INFJs, and it's kind of hard to beat. And also playing into this is SE inferior, so extroverted sensing inferior. And there's a lot to say about the inferior sensing, or just inferior function in general. So inferior function It's something people aren't confident in. It's something that there's a disproportion of use between the hero function and the inferior function. So INFJs will be getting these intuitions and impressions, universal scale, divine scale, and then because they have SE inferior, they're going to have a tendency to not go and verify this in concrete reality with observable facts and kind of tangibility, which is extroverted sensing. So that's another unfortunate aspect of the inferior function, that it tends to be neglected, and it fails to compensate for the strength of the dominant function, and so if the dominant function is not reined in, it's going to go off and just, in an uncontrollable way and do whatever it wants, and maybe too much. So unless the INFJ is sort of aware of this weakness, and they notice maybe over time, like, oh, hey, I really am in my head way too much, and sometimes I fail to verify my impressions and intuitions in the real world, and this has bitten me in where it don't. I'll have to cut that out. Anyway, so so the INFJ may realize eventually that the SE is lacking, and then they might think, oh, I have to compensate for it, and I have to verify my intuitions in reality. But until that point, they're just going to be driven about by the hero function. So next, the parent function. This is the second function for INFJs, is extroverted feeling, and I believe this function also contributes to the INFJ's tendency to remain in their beliefs and to grow in conviction and resolve. And this is because, and this is why I think INTJ will differ with their TE parent in spite of their NI dominance. The INFJ has FE parent, which is a human and people-oriented function in specifically how they're feeling. So it's the emotional domain. And I believe that because the emotional domain is confined within humanity, it can't serve really as a check or a balance for any divine or supernatural beliefs, because they'll have the INFJ might have supernatural beliefs, and then they'll see in the society around them that people's emotions are sort of validated by this. That's actually not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that when we compare it to INTJ, for example, an INTJ might look at rationale and objective facts, such as, for example, evolution. If they come across that, I think they're going to take it much more seriously and integrate it into their worldview and alter their beliefs much more readily than an INFJ with an FE would, because INFJs pay attention to the emotional domain. INTJs pay attention to the rational domain, factual domain. And so one, in my opinion, would tend to lead the INFJ sort of FE, the emotional domain, won't really push you one way or the other by itself, but because of the initial beliefs, I believe it will be taken from the frame of reference of the initial beliefs. So if the INFJ is religious and faithful, they're going to interpret human emotional domain factoids and observations. They're going to filter them through the belief system. So it's sort of, it won't change that belief system. Whereas for an INTJ with extroverted thinking, what they learn, the factual information they learn, that might change their beliefs regardless of the people involved or the feelings involved. But what's real, or what is perceived to be real, what is thought to be real, what's not. So yeah, that's the idea. FE parent, I believe, especially for an INFJ, again, the parent function is a function where if a person uses it to help other people, then they feel the sense of, like, I did a good job. I just helped somebody, and they feel good about themselves. That's what the parent function is for. It's responsible, and it's for helping others, and people feel fulfillment and satisfaction when they do this. So again, for the INFJ who has supernatural or religious beliefs, they're actually going to be using these beliefs and applying them to help other people, and then when these people are helped, they're going to get a feeling of satisfaction, validation, and like they did something good, and they did, and then that's going to feedback. It's going to create a feedback loop, and I believe that'll contribute for the continuation of their beliefs. So pretty much every function I'm seeing is a kind of pushing for a tendency for the INFJ to continue with their faith and not drop it. So we did NI, we did FE, tertiary introverted thinking. I believe because it's the child in the child function position, it can be very strong. INFJs are logical and intelligent, but it's more in the service of their dominant function and their parent function. So the logic, introverted logic, will be applied to sorting and sifting through the intuitions and emotional domain, rather than pure logic of the world itself, which someone like an INTP or ISTP might do because it's TI dominant. And so that's their hero function. Whereas the difference with INFJ, the TI is in service of their intuitions and their FE. So I think more, again, TI is sort of more of a neutral thing, but because of the initial conditions, the INFJ will end up using the TI to support their beliefs. And so that will contribute to their continued radicalization and increased conviction. We did Inferior Sensing. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much the bulk of my case for why an INFJ would tend to continue with their faith. I guess now would be an interesting time to think, what about way down the line where after they maybe leave their community or they're exposed to the world at large, and then they're bombarded with all kinds of different information, different ideas, and now they have as more mature adults, they themselves have more perspective. Maybe they've seen or they've learned they can be wrong, that they've been humbled. Maybe they think there are things I don't know. So at this point, what do I think? Do I think that will there be a continued tendency for radicalization, or will they disconnect? I think that in general the answer for all types will be that they'll level out and sort of become more balanced and mature, because that's what happens over time. We become more aware of all of our functions, and that all other people have these functions, that everyone has the pros and cons, everyone knows something and doesn't know something else. But for the INFJ especially, they are, the archetype is, or throughout history, INFJs have been religious leaders, like extreme, like not like extremists, but the kind that lead to extreme social change and large changes. So I don't think this suggests to me that the INFJ will over time continue to practice and build upon what they've been believing in their whole lives. And so, yes, again, continued radicalization. So what would it take for a change to happen? And of course, this has to be the nemesis function, the opposition. So this would be extrovert intuition. They would need an ENFP or ENTP or even INTP or INFP to come along with some strong doses of extrovert intuition and just bombard them with the entire spectrum of ideas and what's possible and what's out there. And so whereas introverted intuition has a tendency to hone in and onto a very particular final idea or template, extrovert intuition takes those synthesized templates and ideas and just extrapolates to an impossibly large amount. So that's the yin yang. If you take a strong introvert intuition, strong extrovert intuition, and they clash, both will be transformed, and that's good. That's good. That's what should happen. And so I believe that if an INFJ over their lifetime is exposed to just a flood, inundation of ideas, and all very different, they won't have any choice, honestly, especially if the cases are good and they're reasonable, mature people and humble people. They won't really have a choice but to consider adjusting, expanding their worldview, because there's no way that slice can explain everything, unless somehow everything can be encompassed in a slice, but that's kind of not relevant. So, yeah, so that's sort of my case. I believe the INFJ, and probably most people will have seen this themselves, and INFJs will probably even see this in themselves, for themselves, that they're firm in their beliefs, the conviction is strong, they believe that they can make a difference, they should make a difference, and they want that purpose, and they're going to drive and push for it, and that's great. And that's their niche. That's their niche. That's what they're for. So I hope that made sense. I know I start rambling sometimes, but just look at, when you ask questions like this, just look at the function stack, which position the function is in, the function's orientation, extroverted, introverted, and also the interplay between functions throughout the stack. For example, the good example is dominant function and inferior function. If the dominant function, hero function, introverted intuition, is not checked by the inferior function, it'll run rampant, and that might lead to a lot of problems. So the inferior function, extroverted sensing, must be strengthened and honed so that it can compensate for the what's lacking with introverted intuition. And then this will actually end up strengthening introverted intuition because its weaknesses are compensated for. And that's what every type should aspire to do with the inferior function. That's why it's the aspirational function. That's because the hero function needs to be balanced out, checks and balances. Play to your strengths, but the best way to play to your strengths is actually to also make sure you address your weaknesses. So address your weaknesses and your strengths will become even stronger. That's my case. This is the first video of the series I'll be having. If anybody has any comments on this, or they disagree with me, I'd love to hear. Or if any INFJs have experiences related to this, go ahead and comment below. Any type, honestly. And any constructive criticism, just criticism in general, whatever, I'm welcome to it. I appreciate it. Comment below, and I'd love to interact. And yeah, so that's the video. Thanks. See you next time.